This is Bone Chillers to disturb your dreams. Dare to join us? Click subscribe, ring the bell. But remember, we cannot guarantee your safety from the nightmares that await. Prepare to be thrilled, chilled, and filled with a sense of dread you'll find nowhere else. Welcome to the darkness. We've been waiting.
Ghostly hauntings at the Stanley Hotel, known as the inspiration for Stephen King's The Shining. In the shadowed heart of Estes Park, Colorado, nestled among whispering pines and watchful mountains, stood the Stanley Hotel, a grand edifice both alluring and ominous. It was the 1970s, a time when the world teetered between old mysteries and new realities, and the Stanley, infamous for its spectral residents, beckoned the curious and the brave. Chapter 1. The Arrival. Julia and Mark, a young couple fascinated by the supernatural, arrived at the Stanley on a crisp October evening. The hotel, bathed in the golden hues of sunset, appeared almost welcoming. They were greeted by the concierge, Mr. Thompson, whose eyes seemed to carry centuries of untold stories. He spoke of the hotel's history, casually mentioning the ballroom and the fourth floor as areas of particular interest. Chapter 2. The Ballroom. Later that night, Julia, unable to sleep, ventured down to the ballroom. The grand chandeliers cast eerie shadows, and the air felt charged with anticipation. As she explored, the faint sound of piano music tickled her ears. She followed the melody to its source, only to find the piano bench empty, the music crescendoed, enveloping her in a chilling serenade that seemed both beautiful and foreboding. Chapter 3. Voices in the Hallway. Meanwhile, Mark, awakened by Julia's absence, heard hushed conversations outside their room on the fourth floor. Opening the door, he found the hallway deserted, yet the whispers persisted, like echoes of long-forgotten secrets. He felt an inexplicable urge to follow these whispers, leading him deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. Chapter 4. The Apparition. Julia, entranced by the spectral music, didn't notice the figure materializing beside the piano. Draped in 1920s attire, the apparition played with an otherworldly grace. She turned towards Julia, her eyes void of life yet burning with an intense sorrow. Julia, frozen in both fear and fascination, could not avert her gaze. Chapter 5. The Hidden Room. Mark stumbled upon an unmarked door, slightly ajar. Inside he discovered a room that seemed untouched by time, filled with relics from a bygone era. The air was thick with the scent of old perfume and faded memories. On the wall, a series of photographs depicted the hotel's history, and in each a shadowy figure lurked, its presence becoming more pronounced over time. Chapter 6. The dance back in the ballroom, the ghostly pianist beckoned Julia closer, her hands moving with an ethereal fluidity. Suddenly, other figures emerged, dancing in a spectral waltz around her. Julia, caught in their rhythm, felt an overwhelming sadness, as if their unfulfilled desires from life were being imparted onto her. Chapter 7. The Revelation. Mark, examining the photographs, realized with a shock that the shadowy figure resembled Mr. Thompson. Rushing back to confront him, Mark was intercepted by Julia, her face pale and eyes haunted. She recounted her encounter, and together they confronted the concierge. Chapter 8. The Truth Unveiled. Mr. Thompson, with a resigned sigh, revealed the truth. He was the caretaker of the hotel's spirits, bound to the Stanley by a tragic event decades ago. The ghostly residents, he explained, were trapped in a loop, reliving their final moments, their stories etched into the very fabric of the hotel. Chapter 9. The Escape. As they absorbed this revelation, the hotel seemed to awaken, the walls groaning with the weight of 100 years. The ghostly inhabitants became more agitated, their forms flickering in and out of reality. Realizing the danger, Julia and Mark hurried to leave, the hotel's supernatural inhabitants swirling around them in a maelstrom of spectral energy. Chapter 10. The Legacy. Once outside, they watched as the hotel returned to its deceptive calm. They left Estes Park with more questions than answers, the experience at the Stanley forever imprinted on their souls. The hotel continued to stand, a timeless sentinel, waiting for the next curious souls to uncover its mysteries. And so, the Stanley Hotel remained, a beacon to those drawn to the unknown, its halls echoing with the remnants of past lives and untold stories, a testament to the thin veil between our world and the one that lies just beyond perception.
The Queen Mary Hotel. A haunted investigation. In the murky depths of Long Beach, California, the RMS Queen Mary, a majestic ocean liner turned floating hotel, rests ominously. Since 1967, guests and staff have reported countless inexplicable occurrences, from ghostly apparitions to the eerie sensation of invisible hands. Here begins our tale, shrouded in the chilling mists of the supernatural. Chapter 1. The Arrival. Eleanor, a seasoned paranormal investigator, arrived at the Queen Mary with a mix of skepticism and excitement. Her latest assignment was to document the alleged hauntings on this grand vessel. As she stepped aboard, the air grew colder, and the once bustling sounds of the harbour seemed to fade into a distant memory. Chapter 2. The First Night. Eleanor's first night was unsettling. As she wandered the dimly lit corridors, the echoes of her footsteps seemed to be accompanied by another set of faint, dragging steps. Turning quickly, she saw nothing but the empty hallway stretching behind her. In her room, she was awakened by the chilling sound of a child's laughter, but again found herself alone. Chapter 3. The History Unveiled. The next morning, Eleanor met with the hotel's historian, Mr. Thompson, who shared the Queen Mary's dark past. Many had perished aboard during her service as a wartime transport, and some claimed their spirits lingered. Eleanor, intrigued, decided to explore the depths of the ship, particularly the infamous room B340, where guests reported the most activity. Chapter 4. The Encounter in B340. Armed with her equipment, Eleanor entered B340. The room was suffocating, heavy with an unseen presence. As she set up her cameras, a cold hand seemed to brush against her neck, sending shivers down her spine. She spun around, her breath quickening, but the room remained empty. Her equipment flickered erratically as if responding to an unseen energy. Chapter 5. The Voices from Below. That night, Eleanor ventured into the lower decks, where the air grew thick with the scent of the sea and old metal. In the engine room, she heard whispers as if a crowd of unseen people were conversing just out of sight. She recorded everything, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, until they were abruptly silenced by a deep, ominous groan from the bowels of the ship. Chapter 6. The apparition exhausted but determined, Eleanor reviewed her recordings. Among the static, she heard clear, desperate voices crying out names and pleading for help. As she listened, a figure materialized in the corner of her room, a spectral woman in a tattered gown, her eyes hollow, her mouth opening as if to scream, but no sound emerged. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The next day, Eleanor confronted Mr. Thompson with her findings. He listened intently, his face growing pale. He then revealed a secret. During the war, the Queen Mary had collided with a smaller ship, causing many to perish. It was said that the souls of those lost at sea were trapped within the Queen Mary, forever seeking solace. Chapter 8. The Final Night. On her final night, Eleanor felt a growing sense of dread. The ship creaked and groaned as if in pain. In her room, the temperature dropped and she saw the ghostly woman again, this time pointing towards the sea. Eleanor followed, her heart pounding, to the stern of the ship. There, in the moonlight, she saw faces in the water, their expressions tormented, reaching up towards her. Chapter 9. The Departure. As dawn broke, Eleanor packed her belongings, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had come seeking ghosts, but found something far more profound, a place where the past refused to be forgotten, where the echoes of lost souls still wandered. With a heavy heart, she disembarked, the cries of the Queen Mary spirits lingering in her ears. Chapter 10. The Legacy. Eleanor's investigation of the Queen Mary became a sensation, drawing both skeptics and believers. But for her, the ship remained a haunting reminder of the thin veil between life and death, a place where the forgotten were forever etched into its steel bones, whispering their stories to those who dared to listen.
The Crescent Hotel, spirits freed. In the hushed shadows of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, the Crescent Hotel stood as a solemn sentinel. Built in 1886, its Victorian facade masked a history steeped in mystery and dread. For years, guests whispered of ghostly residents, unexplained noises and apparitions that roamed its halls. The most notorious of these spirits were said to be a former doctor and his patients, lingering from the era when the hotel served as a hospital. Mara, an avid ghost hunter, had long been fascinated by the Crescent Hotel's eerie tales. She checked in one foggy autumn evening, her heart thrumming with anticipation. The lobby, with its antique furniture and dim lighting, felt like stepping back in time. She shivered, not from cold, but from the thrill of the unknown. Her room, 218, was infamous for paranormal activity. As she unpacked, the air grew inexplicably colder. Mara's breath fogged in the air, and she felt an unseen gaze upon her. Unperturbed, she set up her equipment: cameras, EVP recorders, and an EMF meter. Night fell, and the hotel's corridors became a labyrinth of shadows. Mara wandered, her footsteps echoing eerily. In the old dining hall, she heard faint, sorrowful music, as though from a long-gone era. Chills ran down her spine. She was not alone. Her EMF meter flickered to life, signaling a presence. She followed the signal to the old morgue, now a storage room. The air was thick with despair. Mara felt a hand brush her shoulder, but when she turned, no one was there. Her heart raced, but she pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. In the dead of night, she returned to her room. As she reviewed her recordings, a voice whispered through the static, "Help us." The plea was so human, so filled with agony, that Mara's resolve wavered. She knew then that these were not just stories. The hotel was a prison for tormented souls. Sleep eluded her, and at the stroke of midnight, she heard footsteps outside her door. Tentatively, she opened it to find the hallway empty. Yet, the sound continued, leading her to the old operating room. The door creaked open, revealing a scene that stopped her heart. There, in the flickering light, stood the apparition of a doctor, his expression twisted in a grotesque semblance of care. Around him, ghostly patients writhed in silent agony, their eyes pleading for release from their eternal suffering. Mara's mind reeled. She realized that this doctor was the infamous Norman Baker, a charlatan who had experimented on patients under the guise of finding a cancer cure. His experiments had brought nothing but pain and death. As she stood frozen, the ghosts converged on her, their touch as cold as the grave. Their whispers filled her ears, recounting tales of suffering and betrayal. Mara understood then that these spirits were bound to the hotel, trapped by Baker's unspeakable deeds. With newfound determination, Mara vowed to free them. She delved into the hotel's archives, uncovering Baker's twisted experiments and documenting the stories of his victims. She shared her findings, hoping to bring awareness and peace to the restless spirits. Days turned to weeks. Mara's presence in the hotel became a beacon of hope for the trapped souls. She felt their anguish, their longing for release, and then, one fateful night, something miraculous happened. As Mara sat in her room, the air shimmered and the spirits of the patients appeared before her. This time there was no fear, only a profound sense of peace. They whispered their thanks, their voices like a gentle breeze. One by one they faded away, finally free. But the doctor's spirit remained. His face, once twisted with cruelty, now wore an expression of remorse. He too vanished, his penance finally acknowledged. Mara left the Crescent Hotel with a heavy heart but a sense of accomplishment. The haunting had ended, but the memories of those lost souls would stay with her forever. Back in the quiet of her own home, Mara pondered the thin veil between life and death. She realized that some places, like the Crescent Hotel, were more than mere buildings. They were keepers of history, both beautiful and tragic. And sometimes, just sometimes, they offered a chance for redemption and peace, not just for the spirits that haunted them, but for those brave enough to listen to their stories.
The Myrtles Plantation, St. Francisville, Louisiana, since 1796. Chloe's redemption. In the quaint town of St. Francisville, Louisiana, the Myrtles Plantation stood as an eerie testament to a bygone era. With its grand antebellum architecture and sprawling oak trees draped in Spanish moss, the plantation had been reborn as a bed and breakfast, attracting thrill-seekers and history enthusiasts alike. Yet, beneath its charming facade lay a haunting legacy, for the Myrtles was known as one of America's most haunted homes. Legend spoke of at least 12 restless spirits wandering its halls, but none as famous as Chloe, a former slave whose tragic story had transcended time. As the tale went, Chloe had her ear chopped off after being caught eavesdropping. In a desperate attempt to prove her indispensability and avoid being sent to the fields, she baked a cake laced with poisonous oleander leaves, intending to make the family ill and then nurse them back to health. Tragically, her plan backfired, resulting in the death of 2 children and the lady of the house. Chloe was hung by fellow slaves, and her body was thrown into the Mississippi River. The story begins with Sarah, a young woman fascinated by the supernatural, who decided to stay at the Myrtles with her skeptical boyfriend Mark. They arrived on a foggy evening, the plantation looking like a scene straight out of a Gothic novel. Greeted by the innkeeper, they were warned half-jokingly to respect the spirits. Their first night passed uneventfully, but the next day, Sarah ventured alone into the most historic part of the house. As she explored, she felt an inexplicable chill and saw a fleeting shadow out of the corner of her eye. Dismissing it as her imagination, she continued until she found herself in a dimly lit room with an old mirror. Staring into it, she gasped as a figure appeared behind her reflection. A woman with one ear, her eyes filled with sorrow and anger. Sarah spun around, but there was no one there. She rushed back to tell Mark, who laughed it off, attributing it to her overactive imagination. That night, things took a sinister turn. Sarah woke to the soft sound of a woman humming. The melody was haunting, and she felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. She followed the sound down the hallway and saw Chloe, transparent and glowing, her eyes meeting Sarah's in a silent plea. Terrified but transfixed, Sarah reached out, but Chloe vanished as her hand passed through the apparition. The next morning, Sarah tried to convince Mark to leave, but he refused, fascinated by her account and eager to experience something himself. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed to stay one more night. As darkness fell, a sense of dread settled over Sarah. She felt eyes watching her from the shadows, heard whispers in the wind. That night they were awakened by the sound of children crying. Mark, now a believer, was petrified. The cries led them to the same room where Sarah had seen Chloe. Inside they found the spirits of the poisoned children, their faces contorted in eternal suffering. Then Chloe appeared, her gaze more intense than before. She reached out, her hand solid this time, and when Sarah touched it, she was flooded with Chloe's memories, her life, her hopes, her tragic end. In an instant, the spirits vanished, leaving Sarah and Mark alone in the silent room. They fled the plantation before dawn, the haunting images seared into their minds. Sarah realized that Chloe wasn't malevolent. She was a soul trapped in perpetual torment, her story a cycle of pain and regret. Back home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them from the Myrtles. Objects moved on their own, cold spots appeared randomly, and the sound of humming filled the nights. Sarah knew it was Chloe, bound to her now by the touch. She understood that Chloe sought release, not just for herself, but for all the tormented souls of the Myrtles. Determined to help, Sarah and Mark returned to the plantation with a plan. They conducted a séance, inviting the spirits to communicate. The air crackled with energy as Chloe appeared, her presence stronger than ever. Through the medium, Chloe conveyed her wish, a proper burial and recognition of her and the children's tragic fate. Sarah and Mark worked with the innkeeper and local historians to find Chloe's unmarked grave near the river. They held a proper ceremony, acknowledging the pain and injustice she and the children had suffered. As they spoke the final words, a sense of peace descended upon the plantation. The air felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The Myrtles Plantation remained a bed and breakfast, its haunted reputation now a tale of redemption and closure. Visitors still came, but the eerie encounters became stories of the past. As for Sarah and Mark, they left St. Francisville with a new understanding of the thin veil between life and death forever. The Langham Hotel, London, England, since 1865, the Prince's redemption. In the heart of London, the historic Langham Hotel, renowned for its elegance and hauntings, stood as a monument to both luxury and mystery. Established in 1865, its walls whispered secrets of the past, especially the infamous Room 333, a nexus of paranormal activity. Emma, a young and enthusiastic historian, checked into the Langham, driven by curiosity and her passion for the supernatural. She was particularly intrigued by the reports of a ghostly man in Victorian evening wear and the spectre of a German prince, both of whom were said to frequent the hotel. Her first night was unsettlingly quiet, but on the second night, a chilling encounter awaited her. As midnight approached, Emma sat in room 333, her eyes fixed on the antique mirror across the room. The air grew colder and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows. Suddenly, in the reflection, she saw him. The man in Victorian evening wear, his eyes hollow, his expression mournful. He spoke in a distant, echoing voice. "Beware the prince." Then, as quickly as he appeared, he vanished, leaving Emma in stunned silence. The encounter fueled her desire to uncover the truth behind these apparitions. The following day, Emma delved into the hotel's archives. She discovered tales of a German prince who stayed at the Langham in the late 1800s. He was a troubled soul, rumoured to have been involved in dark practices and alchemy. His sudden, mysterious death in room 333 had been the subject of speculation for decades. Determined to confront the prince's ghost, Emma returned to the room that night. As the clock struck midnight, the temperature plummeted, and a sense of dread enveloped her. A ghostly figure materialized before her eyes. The German prince, his gaze piercing and malevolent. He spoke in a voice that seemed to come from another world. "You seek the truth, but are you prepared for it?" Emma, though frightened, nodded. The prince revealed that he had been trapped in a liminal state, his spirit bound to the hotel due to a cursed artifact he had acquired in his lifetime, an ancient amulet with inscriptions in a language long forgotten. Emma listened intently as the prince spoke of the amulet's power to bridge the living and the dead. He had attempted to use it to gain immortality, but instead became a prisoner between worlds. His presence in the hotel was a constant torment, his soul unable to find peace. The prince implored Emma to find the amulet and destroy it, as it was hidden somewhere within the hotel. Only then could his spirit be freed. Emma, compelled by a mix of fear and compassion, agreed to help. The search led her to a hidden compartment in the hotel's old library. Inside, she found the amulet, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to move under her gaze. As she touched it, a surge of energy coursed through her, and she saw visions of the prince's past, his quest for power, his tragic demise and centuries of sorrow. Knowing what she had to do, Emma took the amulet to the Thames River at dawn. As the first light of day touched the water, she threw the amulet into its depths. A ghostly wail echoed through the air and then silence. Returning to the hotel, Emma felt a change. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and for the first time in years, the Langham felt truly at peace. The spirits of the man in Victorian attire and the German prince were no longer bound to the hotel. They had found their release thanks to Emma's bravery and determination. As she checked out of the hotel, Emma knew her experience at the Langham would stay with her forever. She had faced the unknown, unravelled a century-old mystery, and in doing so had freed 2 lost souls. The Langham Hotel, once a place of eerie hauntings, had become a symbol of closure and peace, its paranormal past now a part of history.
Thank you for watching, and remember, the darkness awaits. Until our paths cross again, stay fearful and stay subscribed.